If you or I could time travel to any point in history, I'm sure we'd agree that being on board the Titanic right before it sinks, without any way to stop that from happening, probably wouldn't be near the top of our list. And that makes us very different from Frank Carlson, the protagonist and player character of the 1996 time travel adventure game, Titanic Adventure Out of Time. He wanted nothing more than to go back to that fateful night which ruined his life, and apparently altered the entire course of human history. But sitting safely at my computer in a warm, oxygen-filled room, it's still pretty fascinating to travel around this very faithful recreation of the Titanic, exploring and interacting with passengers in an up-close and personal way that no movie or history book could reproduce. And that's even while taking into account the now 30-year-old graphics and uncanny face animations, which might give you nightmares. Which will definitely give you nightmares. The game isn't just a big history lesson though, it's actually multiple history lessons squeezed together. But it's more than just that too. Within the historical setting is a tale of mystery and espionage with massive stakes, and your choices and performance throughout the game eventually lead to one of 8 possible endings. And the Titanic still sinks in all of them. Yeah, you don't go back in time to try and change that part of history. Surprisingly, you have your sights set on even bigger tragedies. Much bigger. Along the way, you run into a bunch of eccentric, memorable characters.
Hello.
A rich, haunting atmosphere nearly everywhere you go, and some mostly light puzzle solving. Oh, and a few way less memorable, quote-unquote, action sequences too. Titanic Adventure Out of Time was developed by CyberFlix, a company founded in the early 90s and based out of Knoxville, Tennessee, which began by developing games primarily for Mac. After deciding to make a game about the Titanic, they took on the role of amateur historians. The game was set to be an immersive first-person experience in a historical environment, and the level of authenticity they aimed for required tons of research. They consulted advisors and poured over photographs, documents, and blueprints to get the ship and parts of the story as believable as possible. And the passion they had for what they were doing is impossible not to notice while playing. Everything from your mission documents to important mission items to the layout and design of the ship strongly prioritize historical accuracy with a pretty meticulous level of detail, especially for a game this old. And this was rare for a narrative-focused game back then, and still is today actually, even though we've been spoiled by some really good historical games in recent years. There's even a secondary tour mode where you can just wander around the ship and learn more about it. Outside of all the history stuff, the adventure game elements are done well too. There's an interesting plot with lots of twists, turns, and subplots, and thankfully for my brain, no frustrating, illogical puzzles that made me want to jump overboard before the iceberg even hits. When Titanic Adventure Out of Time released near the end of 1996, it was quite successful in its own right, but it also benefited greatly from having maybe the luckiest launch date in gaming history. Just 1 year later, James Cameron's little old Titanic movie hit theaters, which made copies of Adventure Out of Time start flying off shelves, as sales figures skyrocketed to over 1.5 million copies sold by the year 2000. Apparently, CyberFlix wasn't even aware that the movie was on the way when they started development, so that kind of boost must have been a very pleasant surprise. The game's focus on narrative and exploration over complex mechanics, along with its relatively short playtime, made it approachable enough to reach a broader audience of less traditional players. Combine that with getting propelled by a cultural phenomenon, and well, as they say, the rest is history. The game starts in 1942, exactly 30 years after the sinking of the Titanic, in Frank Carlson's London apartment. Carlson is named after an actual person who had a first-class ticket for the Titanic, but claimed that car trouble prevented him from ever boarding. Talk about a close call. This version of Carlson is a former member of the British Secret Service who did make it on board and survive the disaster. After investigating various items in his tiny rundown apartment, while a radio broadcast updates you on the current status of World War II, you learn that Carlson was fired from the Secret Service years ago because of a mission he failed on board the Titanic, which he obviously still ruminates on. Oh, and there's also a ticket for the Hindenburg in one of his drawers. I definitely wouldn't want to be this guy's travel companion. Since getting fired, he's fallen on hard times and lives completely alone, except for a scurrying cockroach and an angry landlady demanding rent at the front door.
When do I get me money? When?
Then, as if things couldn't possibly get any worse, a German bomb blows up his apartment. But somehow, the explosion sends him back in time to his cabin on board the Titanic, hours before it sinks. Normally, that'd be a pretty cruel twist of fate, trading an instant death for the likelihood of a slower, more terrifying one. But for Carlson, it's a second chance to complete his mission, a chance at redemption. Classified mission documents inside a trunk in his cabin strongly hint that you're here to try and stop World War I, the Russian Revolution, and hey, why not throw in World War II as well? All of which you'll try to achieve through a butterfly effect by doing something before the ship sinks. Now that you have that gargantuan responsibility on your shoulders and know that everything around you will be submerged in freezing cold water soon, it's time to go have some fun on the ship. Your steward Smethels gives you a message to go meet your mission correspondent, but there's no rush to actually do this. You can track time with the trusty pocket watch, and the phrase "out of time" is even in the title, but for most of the game, time only progresses when you complete objectives. Then when the iceberg hits, things switch over to real time. This sorta gives you the best of both worlds. You get to freely roam the ship at your own pace, explore every nook and cranny, soak up the atmosphere, and get lost down some creepy hallway for the 100th time. But then once the ship starts sinking, it becomes a frantic race against time, especially if you're trying to tie up loose ends that you didn't take care of earlier. But until that happens, the game rewards you for taking it slow and poking around. It wants you to. And it uses its environmental artwork, attention to detail, and large cast of characters to make doing so hard to resist. One notion stuck in my head from playing other adventure games that I quickly realized I had to detach myself from is that if you can click to zoom in on something or interact with it, then it must have an important purpose, right? But there's so much stuff here that isn't useful for anything, but solely meant to add layers of detail and enhance immersion. Some are iconic pieces like the grand staircase clock, but there are lots of more subtle things too. You can closely inspect paintings, menus, ornate furniture, dishes, ransack a dresser to see era-appropriate clothing, practice boxing using that goofy, old-timey stance, or try out other weird, painful-looking exercise equipment. You can even try to steer the ship, but that'll get you fussed at and kicked off the bridge.
I think you've seen enough.
But I'm trying to save us. The artwork for the environments has aged nicely too. Lounge areas like the smoking room and Turkish bath give off an appropriate air of opulence and luxury. The outer decks show a calm, moonless night and give a nice representation of the sheer length of the ship, even though you can move across them pretty quickly. Carlson must have some track and field experience. There are some repetitive sections like the many first-class cabin hallways, which drove me kinda crazy, and I definitely kept mixing up the grand staircase and the aft grand staircase, but overall, the locations on board still have a lot of variance. You'll travel from the upper boat deck all the way down to the engine and boiler rooms, with lots to see on the many decks in between. It strikes a great balance of being a contained environment, but still one with an immense sense of scale worthy of the Titanic. And for me at least, it was as interesting to explore as any fantasy or sci-fi universe, maybe even more so, since the game manages to feel like a little time machine or porthole into the past. You do have detailed maps, which can save you from getting too lost, and the ability to fast travel to certain places marked in red. This becomes incredibly useful when your mission starts sending you running back and forth a lot, but I think it's best not to rely on it too heavily early on, so you can get accustomed to the actual layout of the ship. Even though technical limitations and compromises for gameplay didn't allow the setting to be an exact one-by-one replica of the Titanic, it's definitely still accurate enough that you can get a nice understanding of the ship's architecture, and it's very cool that you can learn that from a computer game. One aspect where I think the technical limitations of the time helped the game was that they weren't able to pack the ship full of passengers. The in-game explanation for this is that it's late at night and most of them are sleeping.
Up a bit late, aren't you?
A modern digital recreation might show the ship bustling with people, but here there's a great sense of emptiness and loneliness, which combine with what you know about the tragedy to give many areas a very eerie, unsettling vibe. This is definitely one of Titanic Adventure Out of Time's most potent qualities, and if you look at online discussions about the game, it gets brought up a lot as one of the main things people who played it decades ago still remember. The soundtrack absolutely magnifies this too. Music plays almost constantly while you explore the ship's interior, and it does an excellent job of feeling suitably elegant and relaxing, while also evoking unease and a sense of melancholy, especially when you're traveling through some of the more spooky areas. Thankfully, you can buy Titanic Adventure Out of Time from digital stores, but these versions do unfortunately contain a noteworthy bug. Normally, traveling around temporarily lowers the quality of the environmental images until you come to a stop, and then the image sharpens again, giving movement a kind of blurring effect. But due to the bug, sometimes the image quality stays lowered and clouds your view a little even when you're standing still. I wasn't able to find a patch or fix anywhere online to solve this, but strangely it does fix itself whenever you turn left in the game, which is weird, but better than nothing, I guess. It's not a huge deal and it doesn't ruin the artwork, but it is annoying to have to twirl around sometimes to keep things looking as they should. Once you decide to actually start your mission, you go and meet your correspondent, Penny Pringle. Yes, that's her real name. She's a fellow member of the Secret Service, here to steer you in the right direction, when she's not busy venting about something that's ticked her off, which is like everything. Her intense personality makes her come across as comically fussy and exasperated, and not someone whose bad side you want to be on. She's definitely a great character.
What a botch up. Some idiot in the War Office booked me into second, not first class. And I've had a fine time of it too. That snooty steward Smethels was looking for you. Find him and kick him smartly in the shins. Glory be! It's about time. You're late. Another 5 minutes and I'd have cancelled your mission.
Okay, I can't go any further without talking about the face animations. CyberFlix's previous game before this one, Dust: A Tale of the Wired West, also used this peculiar puppet-like technique for conversations, but no other developer or game I know of ever did anything with faces quite like it. I'm sure that's at least in part because it looks so odd and unsettling, but I think it also gives the characters a weirdly endearing and hilarious quality that's definitely memorable. CyberFlix seemed aware of how people would perceive it because they gave most characters quirky, exaggerated personalities to match their unconventional appearance. To create this effect, they took over 50 photos of each actor and actress making various mouth and facial expressions, then blended and animated them digitally, and synced it up with voiceover done by separate actors, which sounds quite good throughout the game. They did this in part to save CD-ROM space so they could have a larger cast of characters with more dialogue than what using FMV would have allowed. Doing it this way gave them realistic models and long conversations without the hefty memory requirements. The end result is an incredibly distinct visual style that definitely belongs in the Hall of Fame for strange experimental stuff found in older games. It's worth mentioning that the technique does actually work too. Characters convey their emotions awkwardly, but still effectively, and it makes them way more entertaining and lively than just static images would've. But yeah, sometimes still kinda creepy. Okay, now back to the mission. Pringle reveals that your first major task is to track down a priceless stolen copy of the Rubaiyat and figure out why an important German colonel snuck it on board. As you dig deeper and try to navigate through an ice field of schemes and political drama, 3 more key items pop up that you need to find. If you don't, some shady characters on board will get their hands on them instead, and they'll use them to influence or finance the major historical conflicts that you're trying to prevent. Discovering who these villains are or what their motivations are sometimes requires as much detective work as locating the items. You're certain that the Titanic is going to sink, but the rest of the night unfolds as a well-crafted mystery, with plenty of drama along the way to keep things interesting. And you absolutely can fail your mission, or only partially succeed if you only find some of the key items. If you're too slow while the ship is sinking at the end, or cross the wrong character at the wrong time, you can end up dead too. So before the ship starts sinking, you're motivated to be very thorough with your investigation. And replayability is high since there's a decent chance you'll want to try to get more things right the next time around. Having a flawless run and locating all of the key items requires some careful deduction and attention to detail. However, thankfully the game is forgiving enough to give you opportunities to recover if you mess up. There are multiple routes to reach your objectives, and no matter what's gone wrong, you never really feel like you're out of chances, even when the ship is sinking or when Pringle scolds you, which is just as terrifying.
What are you doing back here? Find that blasted book!
Unlike most other point-and-click adventure games from this era, you solve the game's mysteries mainly through social interactions. There's some finding and delivering items to go along with this, but not a bunch of annoying pixel hunting or moon logic puzzles to bog things down.
No moon.
The handful of environmental puzzles you run into are usually pretty simple, and a couple of combat sequences are lame but kind of funny too, and you mainly just click your mouse repeatedly to win. Besides being a nice change of pace from more traditional puzzle solving, using conversations to progress feels extremely appropriate for an espionage plot set on board what was a prestigious social event for many of its passengers. The story's non-linear structure with branching paths and your ability to actually fail parts of your mission makes every conversation feel important since you're constantly on the lookout for clues and trying to figure out what to do next. Overall, the dialogue balances historical authenticity with entertaining personalities and clues to help your mission. And I never lost interest in what anyone had to say or got tired of hunting characters down to try and learn more. Even Daisy here, the most gossipy, ridiculous character, provides some valuable info if you're willing to put up with her.
Ruined utterly. Scarcely enough left for appearances, I'm told. I always liked Georgia. Married Charles for his name and his fortune, sensible girl.
Conversations also open doors to a bunch of different side quests, which are one of the main ways you're rewarded for exploring. There always seems to be someone hanging out somewhere with another task to keep you busy, and then they might give you a valuable clue or open up a new route to your objective. For example, your first instructions from Pringle are to talk your way into the ship's wireless room and intercept a telegram from the German colonel, which you'll have to decode using a cryptograph inside the trunk in your cabin. It's a nice bit of classic reconnaissance, but hey, we're on the Titanic, the most iconic luxury vessel ever. Wouldn't you rather spend your time here doing something a little more fun? Max Seidelman sure would.
Come on down to the smoking room for a nightcap. Riviera's looking for someone to play a few hands of blackjack with him. What do you say? Not much else to do. Not tonight. Brr. Cold as a cast iron commode out here. So, what do you say?
If you agree to hang out with him, he'll actually introduce you to the German colonel. And if you pay close enough attention here and continue to explore later, you can find an alternative route that lets you bypass the wireless room. Or you can still go there and get the telegram, but thanks to Max, now you have a better understanding of some of the major characters at play.
See? What did I tell you? What did I say? Them too. Up to something, I'd say.
A lot of interactions like this can be totally skipped, but then you miss out on some fun character writing, important hints, and interesting subplots, which really help bring the game to life. The passengers you interact with have their own routines and schedules, and oftentimes introduce themselves very thoroughly, so you really feel like you get to know them. They also remember and react to certain dialogue choices, and you get a crash course on some of the rigid class dynamics that were present on the ship. A few of the more snobbish first-class passengers are very condescending towards the lower classes. And there's this crazy guy too.
Gambling, lewdness, and a mixing of the classes are repaid with fire.
You do usually have to be polite when dealing with most people, or risk locking yourself out of their questline by offending them.
Bastard!
Sure, it's simple to spot which dialogue choices to avoid, but sometimes they're hard to resist. If you really can't help yourself, you can go and visit this stoker guy in the boiler room who only respects you if you keep insulting him.
Why, you lying, ugly, low-down, bow-legged, yellow, drunken cur? Who's all right by me?
Along with him, a brother and sister immigrating from Ireland also represent the third-class passengers. And one of the game's most fleshed-out subplots shines a spotlight on their mistrust of the upper class, and their fear and helplessness during a very sticky situation where you can try and save them from being taken advantage of by a couple of the most detestable first-class passengers. Even though a lot of the passengers you interact with act kinda silly and over the top, they still nicely add to the historical authenticity and immersion by giving you a glimpse into early 20th century Edwardian society. What the game absolutely makes sure it teaches you about class structure on the Titanic is how isolated the first-class passengers were from the rest, since you have to keep dragging yourself over to the second-class stairwell and traveling deep into the ship just to find some of the passengers there. Pringle's biggest peeve is that she was booked into second class, so she's severely restricted on where she's allowed to go, which is why Carlson has to do all the legwork. One thing that seemed like it was missing from the fictional side of things is that you're never given opportunities to use Carlson's knowledge of the future to do or say much of anything. Obviously, running around shouting that the ship is going to sink would just get him tossed in a padded cell, which they apparently had on board. But it still seems strange that there's almost no focus on the time travel aspect of the story after the initial setup. You can subtly mention icebergs like a couple of times, and there is one psychic character who also seems to know that the ship is doomed. But there isn't any way for Carlson to use his knowledge of the future to actually help the mission, and I just couldn't help but feel a little bothered by that. When the inevitable iceberg finally hits, the time limit to get off the ship begins, and the tension ramps up drastically as you desperately race around trying to finish your mission and somehow get on a lifeboat. Periodic cutscenes showing various stages of the Titanic sinking are appropriately haunting and dramatic, and the switch to upbeat and ominous music helps create a very threatening mood. The main focus here is still on your mission though, and while the ending is far from cheerful, it doesn't really spend much time highlighting the tragedy of the disaster. One of the ways off the ship even requires you to play blackjack in the middle of the chaos, which felt pretty strange considering the horrible fate of so many on board. It did still feel like a worthy climax overall though, and there's surprisingly a lot to do and even new places to visit. You might end up defusing a bomb or running around carrying a baby. There are also some tough decisions to make involving how you want to spend your last minutes on board, and some things play out differently depending on earlier choices too. It's worth saving and replaying this part of the game a few times since the time limit makes it nearly impossible to see everything, and even missing the lifeboats and going down with the ship opens up some new dialogue right before the plunge. The final ending segment takes place right back where you started, 30 years later in Carlson's London apartment, except now things are much different in the world around him. He narrates how your actions on the Titanic affected history, with different outcomes dependent on which important items you managed to keep from your enemies. Some outcomes are satisfying, some amusing, and some terrifying, but all of them are interesting, well thought out, and show that your mission had a huge impact on the future. It can be a little disheartening to go through everything you did and realize that only partial success by collecting just some of the 4 key items actually results in the world being worse off than before. However, the game was clearly designed for multiple playthroughs, which is also made evident by its different paths, branching narrative, and short playtime. And I do like that there's some real challenge involved with getting the true good ending. Plus, you can skip the hint-related side quests you've already done and get through the game much quicker on subsequent playthroughs. And a perfect run does feel a little sweeter knowing the horrible outcomes you avoided. Well, there you have Titanic Adventure Out of Time, a once popular, now overlooked adventure game that's a fun and unique blend of edutainment and weirdness. Its heavy atmosphere and detailed setting are great examples of how narrative games based on actual history can be just as captivating and interesting as solely fictional ones, if not more so. I stepped away from it feeling like I actually learned something, and I had a really good time. And I got a little freaked out. It frequently goes on sale on Steam and GOG for like $1, and you can't beat that. Although I wish they'd fix that annoying bug that sometimes lowers the image quality. There are only a few other games I know of that scratch a similar kind of itch, and I wish we'd see more detailed, immersive adventures set in interesting historical places. Titanic Adventure Out of Time has been widely compared to The Last Express, which came out about a year later in 1997. It's also an immersive first-person historical adventure set on a luxury vehicle during the early 20th century, so it's easy to see why those comparisons exist. I wonder what I should do a video on next. Maybe I'll see you then.